Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. Let's. The French Quarter in New Orleans pulsed with life, a kaleidoscope of jazz and bourbon-soaked dreams. Under a flickering gas lantern, Ryan Callahan pinned Elena Novak against a weathered brick wall in a narrow alley, the distant wail of a saxophone weaving through the humid night air. His calloused hands framed her face, fingers tangling in her wild curly hair, as their lips crashed together in a kiss that felt like a storm breaking. Her breath hitched warm and ragged against his mouth, tasting faintly of the beignets they'd shared earlier. The world around them, the laughter of drunken revelers, the clink of glasses, faded into nothing. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice, a low, trembling plea as his hands slid down her sides, gripping the curve of her hips through her thin dress. The heat of his touch burned through the fabric, setting her skin ablaze. Every inch of her wanted to melt into him, to let go of the polished armor she'd worn for years. His lips trailed to her jaw, then her neck, and she arched against him, her nails digging into his shoulders. The scent of his aftershave mixed with the faint musk of motor oil that always clung to him was intoxicating. "You're gonna be the death of me, Elena?" he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with want. His hands tightened on her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. For a moment, they were just two people stripped of titles and pasts, lost in a hunger that had been building for weeks. Her fingers slipped under his shirt, tracing the hard lines of his stomach, and he groaned softly, his forehead resting against hers as he fought for control. A burst of laughter from a passing group snapped them back to reality. They froze, breathless, their eyes locked in the dim light. Elena's lips curved into a shy, almost mischievous smile. Her cheeks flushed. "You're making me lose my damn mind. Ryan Callahan," she said, her voice still shaky but laced with a laugh. He grinned, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Good, 'cause you're doing the same to me." They stood there, caught in the afterglow of the moment, until the music from the nearby jazz club swelled again, pulling them back into the world. But how had they gotten here, to this alley, this kiss, this fire, to understand that we have to go back to a rainy night in a small Maine town where two strangers' paths first crossed? The rain came down in sheets, drumming against the windows of the Lobster Claw, a cozy diner tucked along the waterfront of Boothbay Harbor, Maine. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting a pinkish glow across the cobblestone street where puddles reflected the lights like scattered stars. Inside, the air smelled of fresh-baked cornbread, steaming clam chowder, and strong black coffee. A jukebox in the corner played Billie Holiday's sultry voice, mingling with the low hum of late-night conversations. It was the kind of place where fishermen swapped stories and tourists sought refuge from the cold, a sanctuary of warmth in a stormy world. Ryan Callahan sat in his corner booth, his usual spot, nursing a chipped mug of coffee. At 32, he was all rugged edges and quiet strength, with tousled brown hair, piercing green eyes, and hands stained with motor oil from a long day at the garage. His faded flannel shirt and worn jeans spoke of a man who worked hard and lived simply. A damp leather jacket hung over the back of his chair, and a dog-eared copy of The Sun Also Rises lay open beside his plate of half-eaten fries. Ryan wasn't much for small talk, but the Lobster Claw was his escape, a place where no one asked about his past, or the father who'd left him with more scars than memories. Here he could just be. Across the room near a window, fogged with condensation, sat Elena Novak. At 35, she was a vision of poised elegance, even in the casual gray hoodie and jeans she'd thrown on to blend in. Her dark curly hair spilled over her shoulders, and her deep brown eyes held a quiet intensity, like she was carrying a world of secrets. Raised in Harlem, she'd clawed her way to the top building. Novak Enterprises into a tech empire in Boston. But success came with a price. Endless meetings, relentless expectations, and a loneliness she hid behind a flawless smile. Tonight she wasn't a CEO or a headline. She was just Elena craving a moment to breathe. Her bowl of clam chowder sat untouched, a slice of cornbread crumbling beside it. It was a humble meal, worlds away from the Michelin-starred dishes she was used to, but it felt right. She reached into her bag to pay, then froze. Her wallet was gone. Panic flickered in her chest as she rifled through her pockets, her coat even under the table. Nothing. Her cheeks burned as the young waiter approached, his polite smile fading. "Everything okay, ma'am?" he asked, his tone edging toward impatience. Elena's voice caught. I must have left my wallet. I can come back tomorrow to pay. I swear." The waiter's frown deepened. "Sorry, but we've got a strict policy. Payments due now. No exceptions." From his booth, Ryan watched the scene unfold. At first, he figured it was a simple mix-up, but the tremble in the woman's hands and the flush of embarrassment on her face hit him like a punch. Something about her vulnerable yet defiant struck a chord. He'd been there scraping by, knowing what it felt like to come up short. Without a second thought, he stood, his boots scuffing the worn carpet as he made his way to the counter. "Hey, I got it," Ryan said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the awkward silence. He pulled a few crumpled bills from his pocket and handed them to the waiter, ignoring the curious stares from a couple of regulars at the bar. The waiter shrugged, took the money, and headed back to the kitchen, visibly relieved. Elena's eyes snapped to Ryan's, wide and mortified. She looked away quickly, her fingers twisting the edge of her hoodie. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I could have figured it out." Ryan offered a small, reassuring smile, leaning casually against the counter. "It's just a bowl of chowder, lady. Everyone's got rough days. No need to make a big deal out of it." Her cheeks flushed deeper, and she shook her head. "Still, that was kind of you." She hesitated, then met his gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. His eyes were warm, unguarded, and something in them made her heart skip. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the receipt, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her, like static on a cold day. Her breath caught and she quickly looked down, tucking a curl behind her ear. Ryan chuckled, brushing off her thanks. "Look, I've been there. Spilled coffee on my shirt, forgot my wallet, the works. Sometimes you just need someone to cut you a break." His words were so earnest, so free of expectation, that Elena felt a lump in her throat. In her world, kindness always came with strings. Not with him. She fumbled in her bag, pulling out a napkin and a pen. Her hands shook slightly as she scribbled a note, folding it carefully before standing. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, raw with gratitude. She slid the napkin across the counter toward him, her fingers lingering for a split second. "I mean it." Before he could respond, she turned and slipped out the door, the bell above it chiming softly as she stepped into the rain. Ryan watched her disappear into the misty night, her silhouette fading under the streetlights. Curiosity tugged at him, and he unfolded the napkin. The note was simple, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "I owe you. Please let me make this right, Elena." Below it was a phone number. He stared at the words, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Who was she? Her vulnerability had felt real, but there was something else. Poise, grace, a guarded edge that left him intrigued. He slipped the napkin into his jacket pocket, his coffee now cold on the table. Something told him this wasn't the last he'd see of her. Elena sat in the back of her sleek black sedan, the rain streaking down the windows as her driver navigated the winding roads out of Boothbay Harbor. She clutched her coat tightly, the warmth of Ryan's gesture lingering like an ember in her chest. It had been years since anyone had done something so selfless for her. No questions asked, no motives hidden. For the first time in forever, she'd felt seen not as Elena Novak, CEO, but as just Elena, a woman caught in the rain. Ryan, back at the diner, paid his tab and stepped into the storm, the napkin burning a hole in his pocket. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he barely noticed. His mind was on her. Those dark eyes, that fleeting touch, the way she'd looked at him like he was more than just a guy with grease under his nails. He didn't know her story, but he knew one thing. Their paths were meant to cross again. Hey, if you're hooked on Ryan and Elena's story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What do you think will happen next in this rainy romantic tale? Share your thoughts. I'm dying to hear. The lobster claw was quieter than usual, the rain having chased away all but the most stubborn regulars. The jukebox hummed with an old Ella Fitzgerald tune, and the scent of fried clams and coffee hung heavy in the air. Ryan Callahan slouched in his corner booth, his boots propped on the seat across from him, a half-read copy of A Farewell to Arms open on the table. His flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms smudged with grease from a long day at the garage. He'd been distracted all week, his thoughts drifting to the napkin tucked in his jacket pocket, to the woman who'd left it there. Elena. Her name rolled around in his head like a song he couldn't shake. The bell above the door chimed, and Ryan's eyes flicked up instinctively. There she was. Elena Novak, stepping inside with a nervous smile, her dark curls damp from the drizzle outside. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, but there was something about her, a quiet grace, a spark in her deep brown eyes that made the room feel smaller. She scanned the diner, her gaze landing on him, and for a moment, their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. "Hey," she said, sliding into the booth across from him, her voice soft but warm. "I owe you a coffee, and maybe an explanation." Ryan raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at his lips. "Lady, you don't owe me nothing, but I won't say no to coffee." He leaned back, studying her. Up close, she was even more striking. High cheekbones, a smile that felt like it could unravel him if he wasn't careful. But there was a guardedness there too, like she was holding part of herself back. She laughed, a low, genuine sound that hit him square in the chest. "Fair enough, but I'm paying this time." "No arguments, deal," he said, signaling to Mama Joe, the diner's owner, who winked at him from behind the counter. "So what's your story?" "Elena, you don't exactly scream, 'small-town Maine.'" She hesitated, tucking a curl behind her ear. "I'm just passing through. I work in consulting up in Boston. Needed a break from the city, you know." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She wasn't ready to tell him she was Elena Novak, CEO of Novak Enterprises, a name that graced Forbes lists and gala invitations. Not yet. She wanted this, whatever this was, to stay simple. Real. Ryan nodded, sipping his coffee. "Boston, huh? Fancy. I'm just a grease monkey myself. Spend my days fixing engines, dreaming of opening my own shop someday. Nothing big. Just a place where folks trust me with their cars." His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, like he was waiting for her to judge him. Elena leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "That sounds honest. More than I can say for most of the people I deal with." She paused, her gaze softening. "Do you love it? The work, I mean." He thought for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "Yeah, I do. Grew up with nothing, so working with my hands feels right. It's simple. You fix what's broken, make it run again. Not like those corporate types always chasing something they can't hold on to." He caught himself chuckling. "No offense if that's your world." She smiled a little too quickly. "None taken. And for the record, I'm impressed. Not everyone can make a living doing what they love." Her words were sincere, and Ryan felt a warmth spread through him, like she saw something in him he hadn't seen in himself. Their conversation flowed easily after that. They talked about books, Ryan's love for Hemingway, Elena's secret obsession with Toni Morrison. They laughed over his stories of quirky customers at the garage, like the guy who swore his car was haunted because the radio kept playing ABBA. Elena shared snippets of her childhood in Harlem, carefully skirting around the details of her rise to power. The more they talked, the more Ryan found himself captivated by her laugh, her quick wit, the way her eyes lit up when she forgot to be guarded. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and Elena fell into a rhythm. They'd meet at the Lobster Claw after his shifts, sharing coffee and stories under the diner's warm glow. Sometimes they'd wander Boothbay Harbor's cobblestone streets, the salty breeze from the harbor tangling Elena's curls. They'd sit on the rocks near Pemaquid Point Lighthouse, watching the waves crash under a sky streaked with pink and gold. The town, with its weathered docks and bobbing lobster boats, felt like a world apart from Elena's glass and steel life in Boston. Here, she could breathe. One chilly evening, they ended up on a secluded stretch of beach, the sand cold under their boots. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the water, and the air smelled of salt and pine. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering as she stared out at the horizon. "I used to dream of places like this when I was a kid," she said, her voice barely above the waves. "Somewhere quiet, where no one expected anything from you." Ryan glanced at her, his heart doing that annoying flip it did whenever she let her guard down. "Sounds like you're carrying a lot back in Boston," he said, his tone gentle. "Want to talk about it?" She shook her head, but her smile was soft. "Not tonight. Just tell me something about you. Something real." He hesitated, then stepped closer, pulling off his leather jacket and draping it over her shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so uncalculated, that Elena's breath caught. His scent, motor oil, cedar, and something distinctly him enveloped her, and she felt a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the jacket. "All right," he said, his voice low. "Real." "Huh? I'm scared half the time I'm not good enough. For my dreams. For anyone. My old man was a drunk. Left me and my mom when I was 10. Been trying to prove I'm not him." Ever since Elena turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "You're not him, Ryan. You're here showing up. That's more than most people do." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and for a moment they stood there, the space between them charged with something unspoken. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. His hand brushed her arm, lingering just long enough to send a shiver down her spine. "You're something else. You know." "That?" he murmured, his voice rough. His fingers grazed her jaw, tilting her face up and her lips parted, her pulse racing. The world narrowed to the sound of the waves, the feel of his breath against her skin. She leaned in, her body swaying toward his, and a wave crashed hard against the rocks, spraying them with icy water. They jumped back, laughing, the spell broken. "Damn ocean," Ryan muttered, running a hand through his wet hair, but his grin was infectious. Elena laughed too, clutching his jacket tighter, her heart pounding not just from the cold. "Come on," he said, nudging her shoulder. "Let's get you warmed up before you turn into a popsicle." Elena's life in Boston couldn't have been more different. Her days were a whirlwind of boardroom battles, investor calls, and high-stakes decisions at Novak Enterprises' sleek Back Bay headquarters. She was a force sharp, commanding a black woman thriving in a world that wasn't built for her. But it was exhausting, always being on, always proving herself. So when she invited Ryan to a charity gala at the Four Seasons, it felt like a risk worth taking. She wanted him to see a piece of her world, even if she wasn't ready to show him the whole picture. The night of the gala, Ryan showed up in a borrowed Navy suit, the tie slightly crooked, his boots polished but out of place among the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and champagne. Elena, in a sleek emerald dress that hugged her curves, was a vision, but Ryan felt like he was drowning. He stuck to the edges, nursing a beer, watching her move through the crowd with effortless charm. She was in her element, but he couldn't shake the feeling he didn't belong. Then came Marissa Langston, a rival CEO with a smile like a blade. She sidled up to Ryan, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You're Elena's friend, right? How quaint. Did she tell you she runs Novak Enterprises? Worth a few $100 million, give or take?" She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. Must be quite the change from fixing cars. Ryan's stomach dropped. The room spun, the chatter fading to a dull roar. Elena, a CEO, a millionaire. He looked across the room where she was laughing with a group of investors, and suddenly every moment they'd shared felt like a lie. She hadn't just left out a detail, she'd hidden a whole damn world. He found her near the bar, her smile faltering when she saw his expression. "Ryan, what's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. "You're not just some consultant, are you?" His voice was low, tight with hurt. "Novak Enterprises millions. You let me spill my guts. Elena, while you were playing pretend." Her face fell, her eyes wide with panic. "Ryan, I didn't lie. I didn't want that to define me." "Not with you." He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me who you are. That's not the same thing." He turned, pushing through the crowd, the weight of 100 stares burning into his back. Elena called after him, but he didn't stop, stepping out into the Boston night, the city lights blurring as he walked away. Back in her Back Bay penthouse, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, the city skyline sprawling beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows. The gala dress lay crumpled on the floor, a reminder of the night's disaster. She'd wanted to protect what she had with Ryan, to keep it separate from the wealth and power that defined her life. But in doing so, she'd hurt him, and the ache in her chest was sharper than any boardroom loss. She stared at her phone, his number glowing on the screen, but she didn't call. Not yet. In Boothbay Harbor, Ryan tossed his book onto the coffee table. The pages splayed open. The napkin with Elena's number sat beside it untouched. He'd opened up to her, let her see the parts of him he kept hidden, and she'd held back the truth. The hurt stung, but worse was the question gnawing at him. Had any of it been real? He didn't know. But as he stared out at the rain-slicked harbor, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't ready to let her go. The garage in Boothbay Harbor smelled of motor oil and metal, a familiar comfort to Ryan Callahan as he hunched over a rusted Chevy engine. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his grease-streaked forearms. His flannel shirt was unbuttoned, a white undershirt clinging to his sweat-dampened chest. Since the night at the Boston Gala, he'd thrown himself into work wrench in hand, trying to drown out the ache in his chest. But every clank of metal, every rev of an engine brought him back to her, Elena Novak, the woman who'd turned his world upside down, and then left him questioning everything. He hadn't answered her calls or texts, the handful of messages piling up on his phone like unopened letters. "Ryan, please let me explain. I never meant to hurt you." He'd read them once, then shoved the phone in a drawer as if that could silence the memory of her voice. Her eyes, the way she'd looked at him, like he was more than just a small-town mechanic. But the truth, her truth had hit him like a freight train. She wasn't just Elena, the woman who laughed over coffee and shared stories under the Maine stars. She was a CEO, a millionaire, a name in magazines he'd never read, and he was... what? A guy with calluses and a past full of ghosts. The garage door creaked open, and Declan Murphy Ryan's best friend stepped inside, brushing rain off his Red Sox cap. At 35, Declan was a burly contractor with a crooked grin, and a knack for saying exactly what Ryan didn't want to hear. "Yo, Callahan, you planning to sleep here, or what he called tossing a can of beer Ryan's way? You look like you're trying to fix that engine with pure stubbornness." Ryan caught the beer, popping it open with a hiss. "Maybe I am. Keeps my head clear." He took a long swig, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Declan leaned against a workbench, crossing his arms. "Clear, huh? You've been moping since that fancy Boston shindig. What's the deal with you and this Elena chick? She dump you or something?" Ryan's jaw tightened. "Ain't like that. She just wasn't who I thought she was." He set the beer down harder than he meant to and grabbed a rag to wipe his hands. "She's some big-shot CEO, Deck, runs a company worth more than this whole damn town. And she let me ramble on about my life like I was something to her, all while hiding who she really is." Declan whistled low. "Damn, that's heavy. But man, so what? She's got money. Doesn't mean she's playing you. Maybe she just liked you for you, not your greasy overalls." He smirked, but his eyes were serious. "You ever think she might have been scared to tell you? Sounds like she's got a lot to lose, too." Ryan snorted, but Declan's words hit closer than he wanted to admit. He thought of Elena's smile, the way she'd listened when he talked about his dreams, her warmth on that beach under his jacket. Had it all been a lie? Or had she been protecting something real? He shook his head, tossing the rag onto the bench. "Doesn't matter. I'm not cut out for her world. Never was." Declan sighed, clapping a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Listen, man, if she's got you this twisted up, she's worth a conversation. Don't let your pride or your old man's shadow screw this up." He headed for the door, pausing to add, "And take a shower. You smell like a gas station." Ryan flipped him off, but a faint smile tugged at his lips as Declan disappeared into the rain. Alone again, he stared at the engine, but his mind was elsewhere on a napkin. A number, a woman he couldn't forget. In Boston. Elena Novak sat in her corner office, the Charles River glittering beyond the glass walls of Novak Enterprises' Back Bay headquarters. The space was all sleek lines and modern art, a Basquiat print hanging proudly behind her desk. She wore a tailored blazer, her curls pulled into a neat bun. Every inch the powerhouse CEO, but her eyes were tired, shadowed from sleepless nights. The gala had been a disaster, and the fallout was worse. Marissa Langston, her rival, had seized the chance to stir trouble, whispering to board members about Elena's inappropriate connection with a mechanic. The gossip stung, not because it threatened her career, but because it cheapened what she felt for Ryan. She picked up her phone, scrolling to Ryan's last message, a simple goodnight from weeks ago, before everything fell apart. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she set the phone down, her chest tight. Instead, she dialed her younger sister Talia, who answered from New Orleans with a burst of laughter and jazz in the background. "Yo, big sis, you sound like you need a hurricane and a dance floor," Talia said, her voice bright. At 28, Talia was an artist, all wild energy and unfiltered honesty, living in a French Quarter loft filled with half-finished canvases. "What's got you so down?" Elena sighed, sinking into her chair. "It's complicated. I messed up, Tal. There's this guy, Ryan. He's different. Real. But I didn't tell him who I am, and now he thinks I played him." Talia let out a low whistle. "Ouch. You went full Clark Kent on him, huh? Why'd you hide it?" "Because," Elena's voice cracked, "because for once, I wanted someone to see me, not the money, not the title." He looked at me like I was enough, Talia. "Just me." She paused, her throat tight. "But I heard him, and now he won't even talk to me." Talia was quiet for a moment. A rarity. "Okay, here's the deal. If this guy makes you feel like that, like the real Elena, not the Forbes cover girl, then fight for him. You face down corporate sharks. You can handle one stubborn dude. Come to New Orleans for the Jazz Fest. Bring him if you can. Nothing says, I'm sorry, like bourbon and a good band. Elena laughed despite herself. You're impossible, and you love me for it. Talia shot back. Seriously, sis, don't let this slip away. You deserve someone who makes you smile like that. Hanging up. Elena stared out at the Boston skyline, Talia's words echoing in her mind. She opened her desk drawer, pulling out a blank sheet of stationery. Her pen hovered, then began to move, pouring out everything she hadn't said to Ryan. I never meant to deceive you. You saw me when no one else did. The words flowed raw and honest until the page was full. She folded it carefully, her heart pounding. This was her last shot. Back in Boothbay Harbor, Ryan was wiping down a toolbox when Mama Jo, the owner of the Lobster Claw, appeared at the garage, her silver braids glinting under the streetlights. At 60, she was a force of nature, a former jazz singer turned diner, matriarch who'd seen enough heartbreak to know when someone was drowning in it. She held out an envelope, her eyes sharp but kind. Got something for you, boy, she said, her voice warm but firm. From that city girl of yours. Don't you dare toss it without reading it. Ryan's stomach twisted as he took the envelope. Elena's neat handwriting staring back at him. Mama Jo, I don't know if I'm ready for this. She crossed her arms unimpressed. Love ain't a game, Ryan. You don't get to hide from it 'cause you're scared. That girl's got a heart same as you. Read the damn letter before you write her off. She turned to leave, tossing over her shoulder, and bring her back to my diner. I like her. Alone in the garage, Ryan sank onto a stool, the envelope heavy in his hands. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the words. Ryan, I never wanted to hurt you. That night at the diner, you treated me like a person, not a paycheck. For the first time, I felt seen. I hid who I was because I was afraid you'd see me the way everyone else does. As a headline, not a woman. I've spent so long being Elena Novak's CEO that I forgot how to be just Elena. You reminded me. I'm so sorry for not being honest. I don't expect forgiveness, but you deserve the truth. It ended with a simple, with all my heart. Elena. He read it twice, his chest tightening, her words cut through the anger, the hurt stirring something deeper, regret, longing, maybe even hope. He thought of her laugh, the way she'd looked at him on that beach, the vulnerability she'd shown in fleeting moments. Had he misjudged her? Or was he just fooling himself, thinking a guy like him could fit into her world? Declan's words, Mama Jo's nudge, and now, Elena's letter. They all pointed to one thing. He wasn't done with her. Not yet. He grabbed his keys, his mind made up. New Orleans. She'd mentioned a jazz festival once, a place her sister lived. It was a long shot, but if he was going to face this, he'd do it on her terms. The drive from Maine to Louisiana was a blur of highways and gas station coffee. Ryan's old pickup rattling under the strain. He played Springsteen on the stereo, the open road giving him too much time to think. What was he doing? Chasing a woman who lived in a world of private jets and penthouses. He pictured his father drunk and bitter, telling him he'd never amount to anything. The memory stung, but Elena's letter burned brighter. She'd seen something in him, something worth fighting for. Maybe it was time he saw it too. New Orleans welcomed him with a humid embrace, the French Quarter alive with color and sound. The streets were packed with revelers, the air thick with the scent of beignets, bourbon and magnolia blooms. Street musicians played on every corner, their saxophones and trumpets weaving a spell over the city. Ryan parked his truck, his heart pounding as he navigated the cobblestone alleys searching for her. He didn't know where she'd be, but he'd start with the jazz clubs she'd mentioned loving them. He stepped into a dimly lit club, the air smoky and warm, a band tearing through a lively rendition of Basin Street blues. The crowd swayed, drinks in hand, and then he saw her, Elena, on the dance floor with a woman who had to be her sister. Same curls, same infectious energy. She wore a red dress that hugged her curves, her hips moving to the rhythm of a salsa beat. Her smile so free it stole his breath. Her hair bounced with every step, and her laughter rang out bright and unguarded. For a moment he just watched, mesmerized by the woman she was when no one was watching. Then her eyes met his, and the world stopped. The music faded. The crowd blurred, and all he saw was her. Elena, the woman who turned his life inside out. She froze mid-step, her lips parting in shock. The woman beside her, Talia, he'd guessed, nudged her, whispering something that made Elena's cheeks flush. She stepped off the dance floor, her movements hesitant but purposeful, and Ryan felt his heart climb into his throat. He didn't know what he'd say, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The jazz club in New Orleans' French Quarter pulsed with raw energy, the air thick with cigarette smoke, bourbon, and the wail of a trumpet. The band tore through a sultry rendition of St. James' Infirmary, the notes weaving through the crowd like a lover's whisper. Ryan Callahan stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor, his heart hammering as Elena Novak's eyes locked onto his. Her red dress clung to her curves, swaying with the rhythm of the salsa she'd been dancing moments ago. Her curls bounced wild and free, and her smile, God, that smile had been so unguarded until she saw him. Now shock widened her dark eyes, her lips parting, as if she couldn't quite believe he was there. Talia, Elena's sister, leaned in, whispering something with a sly grin, before nudging Elena forward. The crowd seemed to part as Elena crossed the floor, her heels clicking on the worn wood. Each step a mix of hesitation and resolve. Ryan's throat tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. He'd driven 1,000 miles to find her, fueled by her letter and a stubborn hope he couldn't shake. But now, standing in this smoky club, he felt the weight of their differences, her world of power and polish, his of grease and grit. "Ryan," she said, her voice barely audible over the music, but it hit him like a punch. Up close, she was breathtaking, her skin glowing under the dim lights, her scent jasmine and something sweeter pulling him in. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "Read your letter. Figured we weren't done talking." His eyes searched hers, looking for the woman who'd sat across from him in Boothbay Harbor, not the CEO who'd hidden behind a lie. Elena's breath hitched a flicker of hope crossing her face. "You came all the way to New Orleans. For me." "Wasn't for the beignets," he said, a half smile tugging at his lips, but his gaze was intense, unwavering. "You got 5 minutes to explain why you didn't trust me, Elena. After that, I'm gone." She nodded, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "Not here," she said, glancing at the crowd. "Come with me." She led him through a side door into a narrow alley, the night air warm and heavy with the scent of magnolias and spilled liquor. Gas lanterns cast a soft glow, their light dancing across the cobblestones. The music from the club was a distant hum now, the world shrinking to just the two of them. Elena leaned against a brick wall, her arms crossed like a shield. "I'm so sorry, Ryan," she started, her voice trembling but steady. "I didn't hide who I was to hurt you. I hid it because I'm tired of being Elena Novak, the CEO, the headline. With you, I got to be just Elena for the first time in years. You saw me, not my bank account or my name. I was scared if you knew the truth. It'd change everything." Ryan stepped closer, his boots scuffing the stones. "You think I'd care about your money? That I'd treat you different, 'cause you're some big shot?" His voice was low, laced with hurt. "I told you things. I don't tell anyone, Elena. About my dad, my fears, all of it. And you couldn't trust me with this." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It wasn't about you, Ryan. It was about me. Every man I've ever been with. Every single one cared more about what I could give them than who I am. I didn't want that with you. I wanted something real." She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You're the only one who ever looked at me and saw a person, not a paycheck." Her words hit him hard, cracking the wall he'd built since Boston. He saw the raw vulnerability in her eyes, the same look she'd had that first night at the Lobster Claw. But before he could speak, the air between them shifted, charged with something hotter, heavier. He stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her body, the jasmine of her perfume wrapping around him like a spell. "You should have told me," he said, his voice softer now, but still rough. "I deserved to know." "I know," she whispered, her gaze locked on his. "I was wrong. But I'm here now, Ryan. I'm telling you everything. I don't want to lose you." The space between them vanished. Ryan's hands found her waist, pulling her against him, his lips crashing into hers with a hunger that had been building for weeks. The kiss was fire, desperate and consuming her body, molding to his as she pressed herself closer. Her nails dug into his shoulders, her breath hitching as his hands slid up her back, tangling in her curls. The brick wall was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the heat of his touch, his lips trailing to her jaw, then her neck, drawing a soft moan from her throat. The alley, the music, the world. It all melted away, leaving only the pounding of their hearts, the taste of bourbon on her lips, the electric slide of his hands over her hips. "Ryan," she gasped, her fingers slipping under his shirt, tracing the hard lines of his stomach. His groan was low, primal as he pressed himself closer, his body pinning hers to the wall. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a confession. Her dress rode up slightly, his hand grazing the bare skin of her thigh, and she arched into him, lost in the fire of it. "You're gonna ruin me," she murmured against his mouth, half laughing, half pleading. "Good," he growled, his lips brushing her ear, sending a shiver through her. "'Cause you're already ruining me." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his breath ragged, his hands still on her waist. The intensity in his gaze made her heart stutter. He wasn't just kissing her, he was claiming her, and it scared her as much as it thrilled her. A burst of laughter from the club's back door shattered the moment. They froze breathless as a group of revelers stumbled into the alley, their drunken chatter pulling Ryan and Elena back to reality. She smoothed her dress, her cheeks flushed while Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a sheepish grin breaking through. "Damn jazz fans," he muttered, earning a shaky laugh from her. They stepped apart, the air still crackling between them, but the spell was broken. Elena reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "Can we talk? Really talk?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. Ryan nodded, but before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the night. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Marissa Langston stood at the mouth of the alley, her blonde hair gleaming under the lantern light, her smile cold and calculating. She wore a designer dress, her arms crossed like a predator sizing up prey. "Elena, darling, I didn't realize you were slumming it in New Orleans too." Elena's spine stiffened, her hand tightening in Ryan's. "Marissa," she said, her tone icy, "what do you want?" Marissa's eyes flicked to Ryan, dismissive. "Just looking out for you. The board's already whispering about your questionable choices, parading around with a mechanic. It's not exactly the image Novak Enterprises needs." She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a venomous purr. "Keep this up, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're throwing away your legacy for a fling." Ryan's jaw clenched his free hand, balling into a fist. "Lady, you don't know a damn thing about her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Or me?" Marissa laughed, sharp and brittle. "Oh, I know enough. Enjoy your little fantasy, Elena, but when it crashes, and it will, don't expect me to clean up the mess." She turned on her heel, disappearing into the crowd, leaving a chill in her wake. Elena's face was a mask, but Ryan saw the fear in her eyes, the weight of her world pressing down. "She's bluffing," he said, but even he wasn't sure. "Right?" Elena shook her head, pulling her hand free. "She's not. Marissa's been gunning for me for years. If she spins this right, it could hurt the company. My employees, my investors, they trust me to keep things stable." Her voice cracked and she looked away, her arms wrapping around herself. "I thought I could have this us without it touching my world. But maybe I was naive." Ryan's stomach twisted. "So what? You're gonna let her scare you off? Throw this away 'cause some suit might get their feelings hurt." He stepped closer, his voice raw. "Elena, I'm not some fling. I'm in this. But if you're not, if you can't be, then tell me now." Her eyes met his, shimmering with tears. "I want to be," she whispered. "God, Ryan, I want you more than I've ever wanted anything. But it's not that simple. You don't know what it's like carrying a company people's livelihoods on your back. I can't just—" Then what? He cut, in frustration boiling over. "What do we do? Pretend this didn't happen. Go back to our lives like you didn't just turn mine upside down." His voice softened, breaking. "I'm scared too, Elena. Scared. I'm not enough for you, that you deserve someone who fits in your world. But I'm here. I showed up. Where are you?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. The silence was deafening, heavier than the music spilling from the club. Ryan's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. He turned, walking back toward the street, the weight of her silence crushing him. She called his name, but he didn't look back, disappearing into the neon-lit chaos of the quarter. Elena stood alone in the alley, her heart pounding, Marissa's threat echoing in her mind. She'd come to New Orleans to escape, to find herself again, but Ryan had found her instead. That kiss, his touch. It had been real, more real than anything in her polished life. But Marissa's words were a cold reminder of the stakes. Her company, her legacy. Everything she'd built as a black woman in a world that doubted her, it was all at risk. Could she fight for Ryan and still protect what she'd worked so hard for? She didn't know, and the uncertainty terrified her. In Boston, her penthouse waited a glass cage overlooking a city that never slept. She boarded a flight the next morning, the memory of Ryan's kiss burning in her chest, his final words haunting her. "Where are you?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. Ryan, back in Boothbay Harbor, threw himself into the garage, his hands moving on autopilot as he rebuilt a carburetor. The rain was back drumming against the roof, a cruel echo of the night they'd met. He'd bared his soul to her, crossed state lines for her, and still she'd hesitated. The hurt was sharp, but worse was the longing. He could still feel her against him, taste her on his lips. He didn't know if he could let her go, but he wasn't sure he had a choice. The Boston skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena Novak's Back Bay penthouse, a constellation of steel and glass that felt more like a cage than a home. She stood alone, a glass of red wine untouched in her hand, her tailored blazer discarded on the couch. The city hummed below, oblivious to the storm in her chest. Since New Orleans, she'd thrown herself into work, navigating boardroom battles and investor calls with her usual precision. But every quiet moment brought her back to that alley, to Ryan's lips on hers, his hands burning through her dress, his voice breaking as he walked away. "Where are you?" he'd asked, and she still didn't have an answer. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Talia lighting up the screen. "Sis, you're killing me. Did you call him yet? Don't make me fly to Boston and drag you to Maine." Elena smiled faintly, but the ache didn't ease. Talia had been relentless since New Orleans, insisting that Ryan was worth fighting for. "You lit up around him," Talia had said over their last call, her voice uncharacteristically serious. "Don't let Marissa or some corporate BS steal that from you." Elena set the wine down, her eyes drifting to a framed Basquiat print on the wall. A riot of color and chaos, a reminder of the girl from Harlem who dreamed bigger than her circumstances. That girl wouldn't have hesitated, wouldn't have let fear win. But the weight of Novak Enterprises, her employees, her legacy, the scrutiny she faced as a black woman in a white man's world pressed down hard. And now a new complication, an offer to relocate the company to Silicon Valley, a move that could solidify her empire but pull her even further from Ryan. She hadn't told him. She hadn't told anyone. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. The memory of Ryan's touch lingered like a bruise tender and inescapable. She'd wanted to run after him in that alley to promise him everything, but Marissa's threat had frozen her. Stability, reputation, control, those were the pillars of her life. Could she risk them for a man who might not even want her anymore? The question gnawed at her, but deep down, she knew the answer. She'd never felt more alive than when she was with him, laughing over coffee, dancing under the Maine stars, kissing him like the world could burn. In Boothbay Harbor, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and sharp with the scent of salt and pine. Ryan Callahan worked late at the garage, the clank of tools a steady rhythm against the quiet. His pickup sat outside, still dusty from the drive back from New Orleans. He'd barely slept since that night, the memory of Elena's kiss haunting him, her taste, her heat, the way she'd melted into him. But her silence afterward, her hesitation had cut deeper than any lie. He'd laid himself bare, and she'd chosen her world over him, or so he thought. Mama Jo found him wiping down a wrench, her silver braids catching the garage's dim light. She leaned against the door frame, her arms crossed. "You're working yourself to death, boy," she said, her voice warm but pointed, "and it ain't gonna fix what's eating you." Ryan didn't look up. "Nothing to fix, Mama Jo. Just keeping busy." She snorted, unimpressed. "Don't play me for a fool. I saw the way you looked at that girl. Still do, even if you're too stubborn to admit it." She stepped closer, her eyes softening. "You love her, Ryan. Don't let some hurt feelings or a few 100 miles steal that from you. Life's too short." He set the wrench down, his jaw tight. She made her choice. "I ain't chasing someone who's not all in." "Mama." Joe raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? 'Cause I heard through the grapevine she's been asking about you, even sent something your way." She nodded toward a stack of papers on the workbench. "Came in the mail today. Take a look before you write her off." Ryan frowned, crossing to the bench. The envelope was unmarked, but his gut told him it was from Elena. He tore it open, pulling out a set of documents that made his breath catch. It was a business plan for a vintage car restoration shop, his dream laid out in meticulous detail. Attached was a check enough to cover a down payment on a property in Boothbay Harbor and a note in Elena's handwriting. "I believe in you, Ryan. Always have. This isn't about money. It's about your dream. Elena." His hands shook as he read it again. She hadn't just written a check. She'd listened, remembered every word he'd said about his hopes, his fears. This wasn't charity or pity. It was faith, the kind he'd never had in himself. The realization hit him like a wave. She'd been all in, even when he'd doubted her. He'd been so caught up in his own insecurities, his fear of not measuring up, that he'd pushed her away. "Mama Jo," he said, his voice hoarse, I gotta go to Boston. She grinned, tossing him his keys. About damn time, boy. Go get your girl. The Four Seasons ballroom in Boston sparkled with crystal chandeliers, the air alive with the clink of champagne glasses and the hum of an orchestra. Elena stood at the podium mid-speech, her emerald gown shimmering under the lights. She was radiant, commanding the room as she spoke about Novak Enterprises' latest initiative. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. The crowd, investors, politicians, Marissa Langston smirking in the front row, saw the CEO. Not the woman wrestling with a choice that could change her life. Ryan slipped in through a side door, his borrowed suit a little wrinkled, his boots out of place among the polished loafers. Heads turned whispers, rippling through the crowd. But he didn't care. His eyes were on Elena. And when she saw him, her voice faltered, the microphone catching her sharp intake of breath. She recovered quickly, finishing her speech with a practiced smile, but her gaze kept drifting to him, a mix of shock and hope. As the applause died down, she stepped off the stage, the crowd parting as she made her way to him. "Ryan," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you?" He didn't let her finish. "I was wrong," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves clawing at him. He stepped closer, ignoring the stares, the room fading to nothing. "I got your letter, your plan, the check. You didn't just believe in my dream. You believed in me, and I pushed you away, 'cause I was scared. Scared. I wasn't enough for you, that you deserved someone who could give you more." Elena's eyes widened, tears shimmering. "Ryan, you let me finish," he said, his voice softer but firm. "I don't care about your money, your company, none of it. I care about you. The woman who laughed at my dumb stories, who danced like no one was watching, who made me feel like I could be more than a guy with grease under his nails. I was wrong to walk away, Elena. I'm not scared anymore. I want you, all of you. Whatever that means." Gasps rippled through the crowd, Marissa's smirk faltering. But Ryan didn't flinch. Elena's breath caught a single tear slipping down her cheek. She stepped toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "You were never. Not enough, Ryan. You were everything I wanted from the start." The tension broke, and she pulled him into a side hallway away from the prying eyes. The moment the door closed, she was in his arms, her lips crashing into his with a desperation that matched their New Orleans kiss. His hands found her waist, pulling her flush against him, the silk of her gown cool under his fingers. She deepened the kiss, her nails grazing his neck, a soft moan escaping her as his lips trailed to her collarbone. The hallway was dim, the distant music a faint pulse, and for a moment they were lost in each other, bodies pressed close, hearts racing. "Ryan," she gasped, her hands slipping under his jacket, feeling the heat of his skin through his shirt. "You can't just show up like this and say things like that." He grinned against her neck, his voice rough. "Why not seems to be working." His hands slid up her back, one tangling in her curls, and she arched into him, her breath hitching. They pulled back, breathless foreheads resting together, the air electric between them. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes searching his, for hesitating, for letting fear win. "I'm all in, Ryan. I promise." He brushed a tear from her cheek, his thumb lingering. "Then, let's figure this out. Together." The Pacific Coast Highway stretched before them, a ribbon of asphalt hugging California's rugged coastline. Ryan's pickup rumbled along the windows, down the salty breeze tangling Elena's curls. They'd left Boston behind, trading skyscrapers for open road, a chance to find answers away from the noise. The decision about Silicon Valley loomed, but for now they were just Ryan and Elena, two people chasing something real. They stopped at a cliffside overlook in Big Sur, the ocean crashing against the rocks below the sky, streaked with gold and lavender. Elena leaned against the truck, her sundress fluttering in the wind, and Ryan couldn't take his eyes off her. "You look happy," he said, stepping closer, his voice soft. She smiled, reaching for his hand. "I am." For the first time in a long time. Her fingers laced with his and she pulled him close, the warmth of her body grounding him. "What about you? What's next for us?" He looked out at the horizon, the weight of her questions settling over him. "Whatever we want," he said, turning to her, his eyes steady. "As long as it's you and me." They stood there, the waves roaring below, the future uncertain, but theirs to shape. The road ahead was long, but for now they had this: the wind, the sea, and each other. The Pacific Coast Highway unfurled like a promise, its winding curves hugging the cliffs of Big Sur, where the ocean roared against jagged rocks and the sky burned with the colors of sunset. Ryan Callahan's old pickup truck rumbled along its radio, crackling with a faint Springsteen tune, the windows down to let in the salty breeze. Elena Novak sat beside him, her bare feet propped on the dash, her sundress fluttering against her thighs. Her curls danced in the wind and her laugh, bright unguarded, filled the cab as Ryan recounted a story about a customer who swore his truck was cursed because it only broke down on Fridays. "You're making that up," she said, nudging his arm, her eyes sparkling. "No way. Someone believes in a Friday curse. Swear on my guitar." Ryan grinned, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "Guy brought me a sage bundle to cleanse the engine. I fixed the alternator instead." He glanced at her, his heart doing that familiar flip. She was different out here, away from Boston's glass towers, freer like the girl she'd described from Harlem, dreaming under the stars. And damn if he wasn't falling harder every mile. They'd left Boston a week ago, trading skyscrapers for this road trip, a chance to figure out what came next. The Silicon Valley offer still hung over Elena, a golden opportunity that could redefine her company, but pull her across the country. Ryan's dream of a vintage car garage was closer than ever thanks to her investment, but it tethered him to Boothbay Harbor. The future was a question mark, but for now they had this, the open road, the ocean, each other. They pulled off at a secluded overlook, the cliffs dropping sharply to the sea below. The air was crisp, scented with pine and salt, and the horizon glowed in shades of gold and lavender. Elena hopped out her sandals, dangling from one hand as she walked to the edge, the wind tugging at her dress. Ryan followed his boots, crunching on the gravel, his flannel shirt open over a faded tee. He stopped beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder against his arm. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft, almost reverent, like the world's holding its breath. He looked at her. "Not the ocean." "Yeah, beautiful." His voice was low, and when she caught his gaze, her cheeks flushed, a shy smile curving her lips. They stood there, the waves crashing below, the silence between them, heavy with unspoken promises. "Ryan." She started turning to face him, her fingers brushing his. "I've been thinking about us, about Silicon Valley, about everything. It's a lot, you know. My whole life, I've been running toward the next big thing, proving I belong. But with you..." She paused, her eyes searching his. "I feel like I'm finally standing still. Like I'm enough." His throat tightened, her words hitting a place he'd kept locked away. He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "You've always been enough, Elena. More than enough. I was the one who didn't see it too, caught up in my own head, thinking I had to measure up to your world." She leaned into his touch, her eyes shimmering. "Your world's pretty damn good too, you know. Coffee at the Lobster Claw, that beat-up truck, your terrible taste in classic rock." She laughed, but it was watery, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he said, his voice rough with conviction. We'll figure it out together. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, her head resting against his chest. The steady thud of his heart grounded her, and for a moment they just held each other, the ocean's roar a backdrop to their quiet vows. That night, they camped on a bluff overlooking the sea, a small tent pitched under a sky ablaze with stars. A fire crackled nearby, its glow dancing across their faces as they shared a blanket, the chill of the coastal night pressing them closer. Elena sipped hot cocoa from a thermos, her shoulder brushing Ryan's, and he couldn't stop watching her, the way the firelight caught her curls, the soft curve of her lips, the ease in her posture. She was his, and the thought made his chest ache with something fierce and tender. "Tell me something," she said, her voice playful but curious. "What's the one thing you want most? Besides that garage?" He leaned back, his arm slipping around her waist. "Easy, you." He said it without hesitation. His eyes locked on hers, and the air between them shifted, charged with heat. "You're it, Elena. The rest is just noise." Her breath caught, and she set the thermos aside, turning to face him fully. "You can't just say things like that," she whispered, but her smile was radiant, her fingers tracing the stubble along his jaw. "You make it impossible to think straight." "Good," he murmured, his hand sliding to the small of her back, pulling her closer. "Thinking's overrated." He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, his lips teasing hers, until she melted against him, a soft sigh escaping her. The kiss deepened, hungry and unhurried, her hands slipping under his shirt, feeling the warmth of his skin, the hard planes of his chest. His fingers grazed the hem of her dress, sliding up her thigh, and she shivered, her nails digging into his shoulders. They moved to the tent, the world outside fading to the sound of waves and the crackle of the fire. Under the moonlight filtering through the canvas, their bodies found each other, a dance of touch and breath that felt like a vow. His hands explored her curves, reverent and possessive, while her lips traced the scars on his shoulder. Each kiss, a promise to hold him through the dark. "Helena," he whispered against her skin, his voice raw, and she answered with a moan, her body arching into his. The moment was intimate, sacred. Their connection laid bare in the quiet of the night. When they finally stilled, tangled in each other's arms, the stars above seemed brighter, the world softer. "I love you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her fingers laced with his. He kissed her forehead, his heart full. "I love you too, lady, always will." Back in Boothbay Harbor. The air was crisp with the promise of fall, the harbor dotted with lobster boats bobbing under a gray sky. Ryan's auto shop stood proudly on a quiet street, its freshly painted sign gleaming Callahan's classics. The garage was small but bustling, filled with the hum of tools and the scent of motor oil. A testament to Ryan's dream brought to life, Elena had made it possible not just with her investment, but with her belief in him, a gift he'd never take for granted. Today was the grand opening, and the lot was packed with locals, friends, and a few curious tourists. A handmade banner fluttered above the entrance reading, "Grand Opening," its edges curling in the breeze. Declan, beer in hand, was cracking jokes with Mama Joe, who'd brought a tray of her famous cornbread. Talia, up from New Orleans, was snapping photos, her infectious laugh cutting through the chatter. Elena stood near the edge of the crowd, her sundress swapped for jeans and a sweater, her curls loose and wild. She wasn't here as a CEO, just as Ryan's partner, and the simplicity of it made her heart swell. Ryan stepped onto a makeshift platform, a pair of oversized scissors in hand, his shirt slightly wrinkled but his smile wide. The crowd quieted and he cleared his throat, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "I ain't much for speeches." He started earning a few chuckles. "But I gotta say this, shop. It's more than just a building. It's years of busting my ass believing I could do something worth a damn I didn't always think I could. Hell, most days I thought dreams like this were for other folks. His eyes found Elena's softening. But someone changed that. She didn't just give me a shot. She showed me I was enough, just as I am. Elena, this place wouldn't be here without you. Not just your help, but your heart. The crowd let out a soft, "Oh!" and Elena's cheeks flushed, her eyes glistening as she stepped forward at his gesture. He wrapped an arm around her waist, leaning down to kiss her. A tender, unhurried press of lips that drew cheers and applause. When they pulled apart, she laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You're gonna make me cry in front of all these people?" She teased, her voice thick. "Worth it." He grinned, handing her the scissors. Together they cut the ribbon, the crowd erupting in whoops and claps as the banner fluttered free. Later, as the sun dipped low, painting the harbor in shades of pink and gold, Ryan and Elena sat on a bench outside the shop, the celebration winding down. The town was quiet, the only sounds the lapping of waves and the distant call of a gull. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, their hands intertwined, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "What's next for us?" she asked, her voice soft, a trace of uncertainty lingering. Ryan looked out at the water, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Whatever we want," he said, his tone certain. "I got my shop, you got your company. We'll make it work. Boston, Maine, wherever. Long as we're together, I'm good." She smiled, lifting her head to meet his eyes. "I turned down Silicon Valley." She said the words spilling out. "I'm staying in Boston. I want to build something here with you, maybe invest in more small businesses like yours. Make a difference. Not just a fortune." His eyebrows shot up, a slow grin spreading. "You're full of surprises, lady." He pulled her close, kissing her deeply, the kind of kiss that promised forever. "I'm in all the way." As if on cue, a light rain began to fall, the drops cool against their skin. Elena laughed, pulling him to his feet. "Dance with me," she said, tugging him toward the harbor's edge. He didn't argue, his arms wrapping around her as they swayed to the rhythm of the rain, their laughter mingling with the patter of drops. The harbor lights blurred around them, and in that moment they were free to love, to dream, to be exactly who they were. The rain fell harder, soaking through their clothes, but they didn't care. This was their story, born in a storm, forged in fire, and sealed under a Maine sky. And it was just the beginning. Thank you for riding along with Ryan and Elena's wild, rainy, heart-pounding journey. If you loved their story, the kisses that burned, the dreams that soared, the love that conquered all, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment? Want more tales of passion and heart? Let me know, and let's keep the romance alive.